Meu pai tem 54.
54?
55.
É a mesma idade, meu. Que isso?
Brian, você sempre falou pra mim que era 45. Então
Menina,
você
já
mentiu
tá-
a sua idade pra mim.
Is that the kind of thing that you just forget? Really? Come on. Do you just forget that your boyfriend is your dad's age? I don't think so. Now, Brian might want us to believe he's always told her the truth, but from the sheer panic and shock on Ingrid's face, I don't think he has. And as it turns out, that's not the only thing he's been hiding from her.
Tô pensando aí, eu nunca contei pra você que eu vendi droga. Contei não?
Não.
Eita.
Eita!
Ah, uau.
Uau, é muita coisa?
Oh, I never told you that tiny weeny little detail, did I? Says Shady Brian. It must have just slipped my mind. Silly me. Yeah, this changes everything. As if it's not bad enough that he's her father's age. His criminal past might just be the deal breaker. But before we get to that, let's rewind to the start. So we left the pair on their first night together after Brian thought it would be a good idea to test Ingrid. And by test, he meant asking her to do things he could fully do by himself. Things like getting undressed, going into the shower, or putting on his catheter bag. It was all a bit creepy, all a bit too much for their very first night. And while Brian may have been hoping to get lucky, unfortunately for him, his actions totally ruined any chances he may have had of intimacy.
Looking back on Ingrid helping me last night, I think she was a little uncomfortable with everything and a little in shock. It's definitely a learning curve and some time for them to catch up.
Now, Brian might think, right, that he's testing Ingrid in order to build a strong foundation. But the thing is, what he's actually doing is the complete opposite. Ingrid was under the impression that Brian was an independent wheelchair user. That was the impression that he gave to her. Only his performance, his test last night, now just has Ingrid thinking that he's a liar.
Talvez não tenha falado a verdade. Seria o quê? Testar se eu tenho paciência, se eu tenho capacidade de ajudar? Quero conhecer ele melhor, quero entender ele melhor.
Oh, don't you worry, Ingrid. You're gonna learn a lot about Brian and the secrets he's been keeping. But we'll get to that shortly. Now, on the agenda today, the pair are gonna be heading to Ingrid's hometown. And it's quite the long drive. It's gonna mean they have a lot of time to talk in the car, just the two of them. Get to know each other a bit better. And before too long, Brian brings up his hope that during this trip, he'll hopefully get the opportunity to meet Ingrid's friends and family. But the thing is, it's not quite that simple.
A questão dos meus pais, sim, você poderia conhecer se eles não fossem tão cabeça dura e difícil de... Meu pai, ele é ignorante, ele é o cúmulo dos ignorantes.
Now, Ingrid admits that she hasn't told too many people about her relationship with Brian. And while that may raise some red flags, the more that they talk, the more apparent it becomes that these two don't actually know each other all that well. I mean, take for example this issue of her dad. When Brian asks her dad's age, Ingrid responds by saying he's, I think, 54 or 55.
54? É a mesma idade, meu. Que isso? Tô com 51.
Hã?
Eu?
51?
Sim. Sabia não? Você não sabia a minha idade?
Just look at the sheer shock in Ingrid's face. She can't believe what she's just heard. And that right there is precisely why she hasn't told her parents about him. As I say, they really don't know each other all that well. Now, Ingrid maintains that on his dating profile when they first met, Brian's age was listed as being 43. So, given that they've been dating for 2 years, that would now make him 45.
Você tá com 45, Brian.
Tá louca?
Brian, você sempre falou pra mim que era 45. Então
Menina,
você
já
mentiu
tá-
a sua idade pra mim.
Ingrid's adamant that that's what she saw and that's what he said to her. Now, Brian says that's absolutely not the case. So, will we ever know definitively who's telling the truth here? probably not. Not unless one of them can provide receipts. But wherever the truth lies, Brian really doesn't want to be seen as being a liar.
Nunca tinha problema pra falar minha idade, não esconde, até tô com orgulho pra falar. A Ingrid, eu falei pra você, minha filha tem a mesma idade de você.
All of these discrepancies between what she thinks she's been told and what she's actually learning now that she's met him in person are really starting to add up. They're really beginning to play on Ingrid's mind. He told me he was independent, but last night I saw he wasn't. He told me he was 45, and now I learn he isn't. Ingrid is starting to have very real doubts. But isn't it interesting just how casually, with a smile on his face, that Brian raises the fact that Ingrid is his daughter's age? I think it's quite telling that he looks dead in her face, almost quite proud as he says that, while Ingrid looks incredibly uncomfortable.
I don't think 5 years is a big difference. I mean, for me, age is just a number. I mean, I'm still the same guy that she's been with for the last 2 years talking to. It didn't change anything for me.
Yeah, not to be pedantic, but it's 6 years, not 5. But still, of course, Brian maintains it doesn't change anything for him. Now, the topic then changes to how exactly Brian ended up in a wheelchair. And once again, this only proves how little they know each other. Like, they've been together for 2 years. How has this not been discussed before? Like, it's just so strange. I don't get it. But just listen to how casually Brian says what he says next.
Tô pensando, eu nunca contei pra você que eu vendi droga. Contei não?
Não.
Eita.
Eita!
Uau.
Uau, é muita coisa?
Yeah, I mean, Brian is fast developing a habit of not just withholding the truth, but when he actually reveals it, doing so in the most casual manner as if it's no big deal. I mean, what the f***? It's a huge deal. Like, his past is what's led to him being in a wheelchair today. Yet Ingrid had absolutely no idea. Now, Brian actually admits, right? He admits that he was nervous to tell her that he was a drug dealer for 5 years. In fact, not just a drug dealer, he was actually a pretty heavy drug user as well.
Uma caixa de cerveja cada dia e 3 gramas de cocaína na mesa.
Life for me when I was a dealer was a little bit exciting.
Now, Brian goes on to say that it was in and amongst all of this criminality, this criminal lifestyle that he was living, that he met and married his second wife. She was a big part of that, he tells us. But, he goes on to say, my whole life was going down the drain. Sure, I was making lots of money, but I was ruining my life. And you can see the pain, the painful memories this evokes as he's talking about it.
I didn't talk to my mom for probably 3 years, but I was making money. More money than all of them put together.
Brian tears up as he's telling the story. He tells us how one day he woke up, looked at himself, his zombie-like self in the mirror, and realised he couldn't go on like this for any longer. I decided I needed to start afresh, he tells us. I cut everyone from that world out of my life, including my wife at the time, he tells us. But this is when the story takes a shocking turn. You see, just 2 months later, that's when the carjacking happened.
Eu tava estacionando o carro e tinha 2 homens do lado. Ficou e chegou. Quem chegou tinha arma na mão.
And of course, as he's already told us, it was during that carjacking that he was shot and ended up in a wheelchair. But, and here's the kicker, here's the plot twist of the century, Brian reveals that the person who ordered the carjacking was the woman he was married to at the time.
Minha ex confessou ter ordenado o roubo do carro.
Isso me deixa sem reação. Não me sinto bem não, Brian.
Honestly, that's probably one of the most shocking backstories we've ever heard on this show. It's shocking and tragic that that's led to him forevermore being confined to a wheelchair. But remember, Ingrid has never heard any of this before. This has completely shocked her. In fact, in her eyes, this is yet another lie. This is yet another thing that Brian has withheld from her. And that makes her nervous. You can understand why, right? This is a single mum with 2 young kids. Like, the fact that her partner is an ex-drug user and a drug dealer would have been information she'd have liked to have known before starting a relationship. A relationship with a man who might one day be an active part of her kids' lives.
Por que você não falou antes da droga, antes da gente marcar de se ver?
Pessoas que eu acho que não faz diferença, não.
Doesn't make a difference. Interesting. That is also what he said about his age too, isn't it? Yeah, I'm sorry, Brian. Hate to break it to you, but of course it makes a difference. I mean, the way that Brian just shrugs it off and expects Ingrid to do the same is insane. Like, she's just not okay with that. She's floored by this revelation. In fact, she angrily asks Brian,
Quem é que me garante se esse homem não vai, se essa mulher não vai usar cocaína daqui pra frente depois que casar comigo? Ela já traficou de droga? Talvez você não faça mais isso porque você não anda.
Now, the harsh truth is, as much as Brian might not like it, the truth is, Ingrid is well within her rights to ask, think and say everything she just has. Ingrid's priority has to be to protect her kids. But here's the thing, right? Doesn't this just again further reinforce how little these two know each other? Like, forget the fact that Brian chose not to tell her this story before, which in its own right is terrible, but doesn't it tell you everything you need to know that she even has to ask whether or not he's capable of doing it again? That's how little she knows him. That's how unsure she is of who this man, the man she's dated for 2 years, really is.
I'm very disappointed to hear this from Ingrid. I mean, I was hoping because it's ancient history, it wouldn't be a big deal. I'm hurt by it and offended because I know that I've been through a lot.
Again, look, you can understand why that's disappointing for Brian. You can understand why it's unfair to judge someone's present and future based on their past. But I'm sorry, it happens. That's life. That is how the world works, like it or not, Brian. The news he's just revealed is a big deal. Like, sorry, but he has no right to try and now twist it to make Ingrid look like the bad guy. If he's offended by Ingrid's reaction, well, that's on him. He says he's not ashamed of his past, right? But if that were true, why did it take him 2 years to say anything? Now, things between the pair become very frosty from this point onwards. A silence descends on them, and when they arrive at their hotel, they both go their separate ways. Ingrid goes downstairs to eat, while Brian heads to the swimming pool.
Eu sou medrosa com relação a isso, sabe? Eu acho que foi uma crença que eu fui criada. Eu me sinto assim enganada.
And again, I think that's an entirely expected, entirely reasonable reaction from Ingrid. What she's just learned is shocking. Like, how often do you find out the man you're in a relationship with, the man you're considering hoping to move to the States to be with, wasn't just a drug user, wasn't just a drug dealer, but got shot at and ended up in a wheelchair because of his involvement in that life? Like, what kind of world is she stepping into? Who is this ex-wife of his? Is that the mother of his daughter? Is she still in his life? Would she be in her life too? Does he still have acquaintances from that world? Heck, is he even being truthful in what he's telling her? Ingrid has 1,000,001 things racing through her mind. And again, just to reiterate, while of course that's his past, it's unfair to judge someone just on their past. It doesn't necessarily reflect their character today. He seems 1,000,000 miles from that person today. My point is, all of those questions that she has racing through her mind, the fact she's left feeling deceived by all of this, it is, I think, completely understandable. But Brian disagrees. In fact, he feels he's been incredibly hard done by.
The comments that got to me were, you were a drug dealer before, you can revert back to that like tomorrow. That's up.
Sorry, Brian, but you're just gonna have to put on your big boy pants and get over it. It's your own fault that you withheld this from Ingrid up until now. You should have given her that information earlier. You should have allowed her the time to process it, to decide if she wants to be with you. Because right now, I'll be honest, it doesn't look like she does.